Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the advantages of upgrading to EiB Financial Analytics 2.18. We're going to have a look at some of the new features in 2.18. I'm not going to go through all of these. We do now have a full application hosting ability in 2.18, so if you're wishing to migrate your existing a la carte applications to the cloud, we can do that for you. But the ones we're going to really focus on today are the whole areas of budgeting and forecasting, and also talk about the integration with Microsoft's Power BI, which allows us to take your existing financial application and deploy that through reports on the web or through mobile devices such as iPads, iPhones or Android tablets, or indeed just through a straight web browser if you're on the road. And the last one is really looking at increasing the capabilities of our reporting analysis through this thing called train of thought analysis. This says if I'm looking at a P&L report or a balance sheet report, what sort of questions could I ask from that report? If I'm looking at a P&L for the entire company, one question might be, that number looks a bit odd. I want to analyze that by cost center. I want to analyze that by department. Now, of course, you can change all those using filters. What you might want to do is just right click on a number and say break that down by department, break that down by cost center, and the software will just do that for you on the fly and create a new report of your train of thought. Now that's really, really important. It allows us to develop less reports but put these options on all of them so you can actually do these on the fly. You don't have to build all the analysis in advance. We're really excited by that. So we look at budgeting and forecasting. The need for that seems to have gone up in the last 18 months. Report from PwC, they're saying 69% of finance execs are now saying that budgeting and forecasting is a priority, and we've actually seen that in our line of business as well. And I guess the problem with it is that most of the issues around budgeting and forecasting at the moment is the fact that it's done manually and the fact that it just takes too much time to actually do that, trying to manually get the data together, manually consolidate it in spreadsheets, and then manually reconcile it. And PwC makes that point in the middle bullet point there. So if I look at that closer to home, interestingly enough, about 15 of our last 22 prospects who have been looking at financial reporting have highlighted the need for forecasting as well to be included as part of that process. That's very different from 2-3 years ago, when probably only 5 out of 20, if that, actually would request that same thing. They highlight the same issues as was found with PwC and KPMG, that there's too much manual effort, and they don't often do it enough. You know, a lot of the time people say we do forecasting quarterly, really want to do it monthly, but it's just too much effort. And EiB Financial Analytics 2.18 is the only Sage focus-based product that allows us to do that across the Sage mid-market platform, from Sage 200, 500, 1000 and Sage X3. So what are the sort of things we need to do? Well, one of the things we want to be able to do in 2.18 is generate a new version of budget and forecast from the data we already have. Think about this. In your cube in EiB Financial Analytics, you'll have all your actual data and all your budget data that comes from your Sage application. Now, you might have in Sage 200, for example, you just have the one budget, and you might be getting towards the end of the year, and you might be saying, well, I want to do a revised forecast where I've got my 9 months of actuals and I want to take 3 months of budgets. I want to mash them all together and then get my users to update that information on the fly to produce a new forecast. Now, that's exactly what you can do with this new create version capability. You can actually say, I want to create a new version called forecast 10, forecast 11, whatever it is, and I want to generate that forecast from data we already have in the cube, N months actuals, N months budgets, maybe N months of a previous forecast. You can do that in this wizard and it will create that new version for you. And when you process the cube, if you only had actuals and budgets from your Sage data, you will now have actuals, budgets, and that new version of data called forecast 10 or whatever. Now, obviously, once you've actually done that, then the other thing you can do is obviously clear the forecast. You might say, well, I've been doing some work on it, I'm finished with it now, I don't want to necessarily delete it, I just want to clear it, or I want to clear a particular period and get my users to re-enter data, or whatever you need to do. That again, all built in within the new budgeting and forecasting functionality. But where it gets really exciting is that in 2018 you can take existing or create new reports in EiB Financial Analytics, but also then enable those reports. So you can then key in the data into your forecast interactively. Now that's never been possible in previous versions of a la carte. So you can see here that I could key that in at a detailed level. It's looking on the right hand screen there. I could key the new numbers in for Birmingham, London, Manchester, whatever, and that would automatically consolidate to UK sales, roll up through my chart of accounts. And then if I have multiple cost centers, departments, and even multi-companies, then obviously EiB Financial Analytics 218 will consolidate those all for me. And that's really, really powerful. And here's a detailed view of how it works for those of you interested in the technology of it. But basically, we are writing back temporarily to a write back table. And why do you care about that? It just means you don't have to reprocess the cube to kind of see what ifs. You could actually make some changes and see the effect on that data instantly, and only when you're happy with it, then reprocess the cube, and all the information will be loaded and readily available. And of course then, where do you want to deploy it? You can obviously deploy it through existing EiB Financial Analytics reports, but one of the great things about 218 is you can also deploy this through the web or through mobile devices. And what I'm going to show you is how we can create a new budget from scratch, amend that budget and update that budget, and then see the effects of that instantly on the web through Power BI. And that's not been possible really before. Okay, well, let's have a look at that. Okay, so we're in EiB Financial Analytics, and I've just got a cube-based report here that's just looking at my P&L by time. So standard cube report you could have developed in a la carte 215, but the difference in 218 is I can enable that report to allow it to update new budgets or forecasts, and we'll be using this functionality later on. You'll see if I click on the report and go to the cube ribbon, there is a entry here now for data entry on the ribbon, where you can activate it ready for entering data into the months, or you can also set validation rules. If I just pop up the validation rules there, you might want to not allow your users to enter data into certain cost centers, or not allow them to enter data into certain departments, or maybe even certain time periods. If you were, say, 6 months through the year and 6 months you wanted them to forecast. And you can set all of that in here on an exception basis very, very easily. So what I'm going to do here is, if I look at this report, I've currently got two versions in this report of my actuals and budget. I've got the original actuals, I've got the Sage System Budget version, and Sage 200 budget. Now what happens if I'm halfway through the year and I want to create a new forecast called, say, My Forecast 1. I want that to appear in this list, but I want to generate that forecast from, say, 6 months worth of actuals, because we're now coming up to month 7, and 6 months worth of budget, and then get my users to amend the remaining months and see what the forecast outturn is. I can do all of that now with EiB Financial Analytics, and better still, I can then deploy it on the web as well. So for me to create a new version of the forecast, the first thing I have to do is go to my finance ribbon, and you'll see here under the reporting database here, I now have these options of creating new budgets or new versions of the forecast. If I click on create version, you'll see a pop-up box comes up here, and I can give it the name of the version that I want to appear in each of the reports that I'm looking at. So I want to call this My Forecast 1. If I'm multi-company, I can pick the Sage company I want this forecast to apply to. If I click on empty, then obviously it's going to do exactly that. It will just be buckets for me to enter the data. And I could also say, for this forecast I'm producing, what financial year do you want to apply to? and I'm going to say I want this to apply to 2009. And I can then say, well, how do you want the forecast to be created? So at the moment, the way this screen is left, I'd be taking all the values from 2010 actuals and putting them into a 2009 forecast. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, let's just go back to 2009 here. I can select each one individually, or I can right click and say copy to subsequent years here. So I've now got all my 2009 actuals. And I'm going to say that for this forecast that is going into 2009, I want 6 months worth of actuals, but then from month 7 onwards, I want to use the Sage system budget. And again, I can pick each one of these individually, or I can right click and just say copy to subsequent versions. So when I click on create there, what that's doing is going to create all the tables in the system that's needed to process all this information behind the scenes. I obviously don't care about that as an end user. Now, for me to see that version of the forecast now called my forecast 1 in the cube, I have to go and reprocess the cube. So in the process that you do every day at the moment using a la carte or EiB Financial Analytics, you run that update to load all your actuals and budgets. You're going to do exactly the same here, but the difference is along the way, it's going to create a new version of a forecast based on 6 months worth of actuals and 6 months worth of budgets. So I go to my reporting cube. I think I've got a my screen that I use to generate that still open. So I just shut that down, go to reporting cube, and then I'm going to process that and extract all the journals and run the update. Now, this is going to take a couple of minutes, so I'm not going to sit here and wait. I'll just wait for it to start, and then we're going to go and have a look at the Power BI side of things. So this report you're looking at here was based obviously on the cube and accessing this report from within Excel. I can use Microsoft's Power BI to connect to exactly the same cube and view this data interactively as a web page on the web or through mobile devices. So I'm going to go over to that now, and here is an example. As you can see, looking at exactly the same cube, looking at my actual versus my Sage system budget as we was in the cube report. And just like the cube report, this is fully interactive. I can pick the periods that I want to chart here. I can decide whether I want multiple years. You can see I'm using 2009 and 10 in this particular table. And I can also decide if I want to move from, say, sales and look at gross profit. It's as simple as just selecting that information, and then everything will update accordingly. Now, one of the things you can do that's very powerful in Power BI that you can't easily do in an Excel or other based reporting tool is if I've got cost centers that relate to departments or departments that relate to cost centers, I can go and click on one of these cost centers. I can say go to 2010 Manchester, click on Manchester, and what it'll do, as well as highlighting the bar there and dimming out the other displays, it will show me my contribution of Manchester in the department. So you'll see if I go here, you can see that that is the relative contribution of selecting that cost center manager. That's how much Manchester contributes overall to the value added goods department. And I can do that the other way around. I can click on the value added goods department as an entirety here, and you'll see that that now highlights that as a single value. If I just reselect that, and it will then show me the relative contribution here on the left hand side. You can see here the relative contribution of that in the different areas. So this is really, really powerful if you have multiple cost centers and departments relationship, because you can see cause and effect really, really quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and actually move away from the web back to our Excel environment and just wait for the cube to finish. Okay, so that's now completed. I get my cube update successfully. I then shut down the log. That's all been done. Okay, so now I'm going to click on version, and whereas before I just had my actual Sage 200 budget and system budget, you'll now see that I've got my newly created My Forecast 1. And when I click on that now, it's going to refresh and show me 6 months worth of actual data and then the remaining 6 months budget. And that's what's made up my forecast on a year-to-date basis. Now what I can do now is I can actually enter data directly into this report. But before I do so, I am actually going to set some rules for this, because I now know that I am in month 7. So if I'm setting this up for my end users, I'm going to apply some rules here where I'm going to go into periods, and I'm going to say I'm going to allow anyone to enter data in the periods, but they're not allowed obviously to enter into the year, and they're not allowed to enter into Jan, Feb, March, April, May and June. Okay, let's go back and enter March. Okay. So by applying those rules now and closing, it means it won't allow me to actually enter data into those 6 months. So if I pick a particular cost center, I'm not going to allow this at company level. I want to pick a particular cost center, let's say installation and design, and click on OK. That's going to refresh the data as you'd expect. But now what I'm going to do, just to test this out, I'm going to go into, I'm only doing trading expenses here, just so you can see not a lot of data here, but you'll get the idea of how this works. If I drill down on here and try to enter data in anything from January through to June, let me just put something in direct selling there, put 7,800. EiB Financial Analytics says, right, okay, you want to activate data entry here. Do you want to do it now? And I'm going to say yes. Normally that would now post that data, but you can see it says, sorry, data entry rules do not allow you entering into June. So that's good. That's exactly what we wanted. But if I go to July now and enter direct labor and enter 4,500 and 6,700, you get the idea. That now will actually update that report, and you'll see that not only is it updating the cells in the Excel workbook, it's actually updating all the relationships that affects. So that obviously affects trading expenses, that affects total trading expenses, and so forth. And I'll just add in another measure there, and I'll put in something stupid like 900,000, because as you would expect, if I save these changes away, that should actually spike any of the charts that we have. So at the moment I haven't reprocessed the cube. All I've been doing is entering the values into the spreadsheet. What I can do now is save those away. So I want to apply those changes. If I came out now and didn't hit save, it would warn me the fact that I hadn't hit save. But if I ignored it, it would then leave the cube as it is. But by me applying those changes now means that it's now updated the cube with those changes. And I can see those instantly. I don't have to reprocess the cube to do that. If I go from the cost center installation design, which is the one that I just updated, and click on all cost centers, then you will obviously then see the effect of that 900,000 coming through into direct selling trading expenses. Now, of course, that's not just updated the cube for my Excel reports. If I go back to the web now, remember I did this on trading expenses, and at the moment I'm only looking at actual and system budget. So what I'm going to do is, firstly, I'm going to change the sales to trading expenses. So I pick that, look at trading expenses there, and that will show me my my actuals. Remember, my first, I don't have any budgets, it seems, for 2009 here. So you can see my actuals. And now, if I contrast that, whereas before I only had actuals and system budget, I can now actually add into the equation there forecast. And now you're seeing an interesting thing. You're seeing an interesting thing because you can see our generated forecast worked really well, because we said take the first 6 months as actuals, which is exactly done. And then it's actually showing us the 6 months we projected now for the remainder of the year. And the other thing that's quite good about that as well, it also shows the spike that we added into August deliberately. You can see that 900,000 spike just to show the effect. So the great thing I've been able to do here is I've been able to take the existing cube of data 6 months into a financial year. I've then been able to generate a forecast based on 6 months actuals and 6 months budgets from a previous year. I've then gone in to actually change that forecast by using interactive data entry using our new features within our cube report for EiB Financial Analytics 218. And then I've been able to use the Power BI integration to see immediately the cause and effect of those changes on the web. So I've gone from create new budget, produce new budget, change new budget, see the results instantaneously on the web, all within a short space of time using EiB Financial Analytics 218. Now, if I go back and have a look at the final thing I wanted to show you was the cause and effect. If we're looking at numbers here, an obvious question that you might ask of this report is, if I'm looking at this by P&L and by months, I wonder how one of these metrics in the P&L is broken down by cost center, or I wonder how one of these months in the column is broken down by department. Now let me just show you how you can easily add that to the actual functionality to the report. So remember, the end user wouldn't do this next bit, they would just see the final results. I can go in 218, right click and say perform EiB Report Studio actions and analyze by. And this gives me all the dimensions in the Sage Cube. So if I now go into nominal ledger, I might say, well, if it's multi-company, they might want to analyze the data by company. They might want to analyze it by cost center. They might want to analyze it by department. They might want to analyze it by any of those other things in there. They might want to look at it in nominal name, account type, whatever. And when I click on close, you'll see absolutely nothing happens. But imagine if I just save this report away, so it's overwritten this report, I reopen the report, it looks exactly as it does now, but I could go in on UK sales, click on it, right click, and it will say now, how do you want to analyze? What's your next train of thought on UK sales? And I can say my next train of thought is I would like it to look at UK sales by cost center. And then that's going to create a brand new report for me on the fly. And it's now show me that it shows me UK sales. That's what I picked there. Of course, this report is fully interactive in its own right. So if I want to change UK sales to gross profit, I can double click on that and it will obviously change in the same way as any other report would change. But you can see my installation and design there took a massive hit because of the 900,000, I guess, erroneous forecast I deliberately put in. But I could actually say, okay, well, I see that's a problem in installation design. Was that in a particular department? And I can right click here again now on all and click analyze by department. And that will create another new report for me. Now I will have cost centers in my rows. I will have departments in my columns, and I'll have homed in on gross profit. So this is really, really powerful, because if you have interdependencies between cost centers and departments, you can traverse those from any report. You know, you could set up these as default selections on all of your reports, and then that way, how good is that? You can instantly then just go and analyze them in any way. None of these are set up in advance. Now, of course, having said all that, if you suddenly decided, well, actually that report there is actually great, I actually want that report in its own way, just save it away. And then that's instantly available to you when you come back in the future. Save it to the gallery, save it to your local drive. And you'll see that when I shut this down, you'll see that it is a new report in its own right, because as I hit don't save there, I go back to the previous iteration of the report where I had time and cost centers in the columns, in rows respectively. And then if I don't save that one, when I close it, I'm back to my original data entry report. So I hope that gave you a good understanding of what we were trying to achieve there with these three new key areas. They're really big areas in Financial Analytics 2.18. There is the ability now to do budgeting and forecasting, generating a budget from existing data, and then amending that budget or forecast using interactive data entry techniques through our standard reports. It's not just about publishing to the community within your organization. If you want to get those results instantaneously out on the road, then by integrating it with Power BI, your users can see it on mobile devices or see it on the web. And last but not least, if you want to traverse your data from any report and take this train of thought, I've seen something I don't like, I'd like to analyze that by, then you can set those parameters up really, really easy in EiB Financial Analytics 2.18. Thank you very much.